What if Trump already knew? Not rumors, not speculation, but information that was sitting inside Epstein's files before his death. Because what Senator Murray asked Pam Bondi next wasn't just about a death. It was about what wasn't investigated and why. And the woman sitting under oath in front of Senator Murray had been responsible for answering every single one of those questions. She didn't. And today that silence was about to go on the record. Did anyone actually investigate this? Or did everyone already know what happened? And in just 83 seconds, everything started to fall apart. And we need to talk about every single second of it. Because this wasn't a procedural failure. This wasn't bureaucratic incompetence. The details of what happened and what was never investigated form a pattern so specific, so deliberate, that Senator Murray came to that hearing room not with suspicions, but with a timeline. A documented, cross-referenced, sourced timeline that the Justice Department had spent years praying no one would assemble. She assembled it. Murray entered the room quietly. No drama, no theatrical build-up, just a leather folder, a legal pad, and the particular stillness of a former prosecutor who has already won before the first question lands. Attorney General Bondi sat across from her, looking composed, prepared, confident. The way people are confident when they believe the walls around them are still standing. They weren't. Attorney General Bondi, Murray began, her voice carrying the low, deliberate weight of someone laying a foundation. I want to start with something simple. The 48 hours before his death, specifically the communications. Who did he speak to? Not in general terms, names, calls, recipients. Were those records fully secured and reviewed by your office? Because according to internal logs, Murray continued, not waiting for an answer, there were multiple outgoing communications in his final days, some connected to individuals in his financial network, some that have never been publicly explained. Were those communications made available to your investigators? Because according to internal summaries reviewed by multiple outlets, at least one of those final calls has never been fully clarified. Not who initiated it, not what was discussed, just a gap in a timeline that was supposed to be airtight. And when timelines have gaps, investigators usually ask why. Or were they quietly set aside? Senator, communications of that nature would fall under... Under what? Murray said. He was in federal custody. Every call he made was logged. I'm asking whether those logs were reviewed. Yes or no? Her jaw tightened. I received briefings consistent with the last people he spoke to, Murray said, overriding the non-answer with the quiet authority of someone who had heard enough of them. Were they interviewed? Were they identified publicly? Because the American people have never been told who Jeffrey Epstein spent his final hours in contact with, and I would like to know why. No answer came. But Murray wasn't finished, not even close. She turned a page. Let's talk about the money, she said, because this is where it stops feeling like negligence and starts feeling like something else entirely. She looked directly at Bondi. In the days immediately preceding his death, significant financial transfers were initiated. Not routine account maintenance, movements of a scale and nature that, under any normal regulatory framework, would trigger immediate review and documentation. Transfers connected to individuals whose names appear in sealed estate materials. She paused. Were those transactions flagged? Were they investigated? Did your office ask who initiated them and why they occurred at that specific moment? Bondi opened her mouth. Because $1.1 billion moved through accounts connected to the Epstein estate in the weeks following his death, Murray continued. $1.1 billion. No hearings, no urgency, just silence. And nobody in that room could explain why. No hearings, no urgency, just silence. She looked up. Why? The room didn't move. And here is where you need to pay attention. Because what Murray said next was not about money or procedure or oversight failures. It was about something much darker. The kind of question that, once asked, cannot be unasked. Attorney General Bondi, Murray said, her voice dropping just slightly. Let me ask you about the physical circumstances of that night, because independent experts, pathologists retained by the family, not by the government, have raised serious questions about the nature of what happened in that cell. Questions that conflict with the official conclusion. Questions that, in any other context, would have triggered a mandatory second review. She paused. Did your office request an independent forensic review, one conducted outside the institutional chain that was already implicated in the oversight failures of that evening? A beat. No, Bondi said quietly. No, Murray repeated, not with contempt, with something quieter and more damaging. The tone of someone recording a fact for the historical record. The cameras in the unit were non-operational. And it wasn't just that the cameras weren't working. Investigators later confirmed that footage from nearby units, areas that should have captured movement in and out, was also unavailable. Not corrupted, not incomplete, just missing. And when multiple systems fail at the same time, investigators usually don't call that coincidence. The guards on duty failed to conduct mandatory checks and documented those checks as completed when they were not. The cellmate, who should have been present, had been transferred out shortly before, because just weeks before, there had already been a serious incident inside that same facility. An incident that should have triggered heightened supervision, stricter monitoring, constant oversight. Instead, protocols were relaxed, and the one person who should have been under the highest level of watch was left in the lowest level of protection. And the forensic questions raised by independent experts were never answered by a second independent review. She let that sequence sit in the air. Does that pattern concern you, Attorney General? Or maybe I should ask this differently. Do you actually believe he died the way we were told? Or was the conclusion written before the investigation even began? Appropriate reviews were conducted by the relevant. Who authorised that transfer? On whose instruction was Epstein left alone in that cell on that night? More silence. The kind that fills a room from wall to wall. Because someone made that decision, Murray said. It didn't happen by accident. Someone with the authority to move a federal detainee chose to move him. Someone with access to facility systems was present when those cameras went dark. Someone, somewhere in that chain of custody, made a series of decisions that, taken individually, might be explained away. And whoever it was had enough power to reach inside a federal facility. Enough reach to make protocols disappear. Because access to that unit wasn't random. Every entry required clearance, logged, verified, which means if someone was there who shouldn't have been, that record either exists or it was never meant to. And either possibility raises the same question. But taken together, she paused. They formed something that a serious investigator would not walk away from. She turned to another page, and the room somehow got quieter. I want to talk about Mark Epstein, she said. A few reporters looked up. Jeffrey Epstein's brother, his statements were received by your office. Did you personally review them? Not a summary, his actual words. Bondi hesitated. I reviewed materials. Mark Epstein said he does not believe his brother's death occurred the way the official record states, Murray said. He said directly that if this had been a random act, there would be no reason for a cover-up, his words. And then he said something else. She looked down at the page. He said that in 2016, his brother told him that if he revealed what he knew about certain candidates, the results of that election would need to be invalidated. That the information he possessed was that consequential. She set the paper flat. And one of those candidates was Donald Trump. So the question isn't just what Epstein knew, it's who else knew it too. Mark Epstein confirmed that the two were, his word, very close. He said that publicly on the record. Murray looked at Bondi. Did your department at any point formally assess whether the files in Epstein's possession or the individuals named within them intersected with active political interests at the time of his death? Was that question ever asked by someone with the authority and the willingness to pursue it, regardless of where it led? 12 seconds passed, then 20, then 35. A Senate aide along the back wall crossed her arms slowly. The press gallery had gone completely still. No typing, no shuffling, no ambient noise of any kind. 50 seconds. I believe, Bondi said finally, her voice walking a tightrope between composure and collapse, that all appropriate steps were taken within the legal and procedural framework available at the time. Murray nodded once, the nod of someone who expected exactly that answer and had prepared for it. Within the framework available, she repeated. Let me ask this differently then. The people inside that facility that night, every guard, every officer on duty, gave statements. Every one of them was questioned. She looked directly at Bondi. How many of them faced real consequences for what happened on their watch? For the documented failures, the missed checks, the false logs, the non-functional equipment? How many faced accountability proportionate to the gravity of what they allowed to occur? No answer. Because from everything I have reviewed, Murray said, the system documented the failure. It noted every missed check. It recorded the camera outage. It acknowledged the procedural violations. And then she paused. It treated those failures as administrative matters, not as the potential facilitation of something irreversible. She closed the folder. Do you understand why the American people find that difficult to accept? Bondi's face had become something impossible to read. And then Murray asked the question that the entire hearing had been building toward, quietly, without theatrics. The way you ask something, when you already suspect the answer and want to give the other person one final opportunity to tell the truth. Attorney General Bondi, she said, Do you believe Jeffrey Epstein's death was fully and independently investigated? Do you believe every question was asked, every lead pursued, every person with relevant knowledge identified and held accountable? She paused. Or do you believe there are things about that night that were never meant to be understood? 83 seconds of silence. 3 cameras. Cameras captured all of it. When Bondi finally spoke, her answer was careful, procedurally constructed, airtight in the way that answers are when someone has spent years building walls around a question. But nobody in that room was listening to the answer. They were all still inside the silence, because the cameras failed, the guard slept, the cellmate vanished, the financial transfers moved, the communications went unexamined, the forensic questions went unanswered. The brother said, "Cover up." The 2016 conversation pointed at something bigger than one man's crimes. And the woman responsible for finding answers spent 83 seconds unable to produce a single one. At some point, this stops looking like failure and starts looking like something else. But there is one thing that no procedural explanation can account for. When you have every resource, every authority, and every obligation to find the truth, and you don't find it, the question is no longer whether the system failed. The question is whether the system was supposed to. So let's be honest. What do you actually believe happened in that? What do you actually believe happened in that cell that night? Because at this point, the official version isn't just being questioned, it's being dissected, piece by piece, detail by detail, and every time someone tries to close the door on it, another inconsistency forces it back open. Think about the sequence. Not the headlines, not the summaries, the actual sequence. A high-profile federal detainee with information powerful enough to implicate networks of influence across finance, politics, and global elites is placed in a facility that had already failed him once. The cameras go dark, the guards don't check, the logs are falsified, the cellmate is gone, the protocols are relaxed. And somehow every single layer that was supposed to prevent exactly this outcome fails at the exact same time. Not one safeguard, not two, all of them. And nobody, not one person with the authority to demand answers, can explain why those failures aligned so perfectly in one single moment. That's not how systems break. That's how systems are bypassed. And if you're still willing to accept that this was just a coincidence, then you have to believe in a level of institutional incompetence so extreme that it borders on impossibility. But here's the problem. When institutions fail accidentally, they overcorrect. They investigate aggressively. They expose their own weaknesses to restore public trust. That didn't happen here. What happened here was silence. Carefully managed, legally structured, procedurally protected silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just happen, it's maintained. And that raises a different kind of question. One that goes beyond Epstein, beyond that cell, beyond that night. Who benefits from that silence? Because silence at that level isn't neutral. It protects something. Or someone. And Senator Murray understood that. That's why she didn't just ask what happened. She asked what wasn't allowed to be asked. She wasn't chasing a mistake. She was tracing a boundary. A line that investigators didn't cross. A line that, once you see it, becomes impossible to ignore. Look at the financial movements again. Look at the communications that were never fully disclosed. Look at the names that remain sealed. Look at the absence of a second forensic review, even after independent experts raised direct contradictions to the official findings. Each of those on its own might be explainable. Together they form a structure, a pattern of avoidance, not failure. And patterns like that don't emerge randomly. They're built, maintained, protected. Which brings us back to the question that sat in that room for 83 seconds, unanswered. Not because there was no answer, but because any real answer would have consequences. Real consequences. The kind that don't stay contained inside a hearing room. The kind that ripple outward into institutions, reputations, power structures. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the goal was never to find the truth. Maybe the goal was to manage it, to contain it, to keep it just out of reach, buried under procedure, delayed by process, diluted by time. Because time changes everything. It softens outrage. It blurs details. It turns hard questions into distant echoes. But every once in a while, someone walks into a room with a timeline, with receipts, with enough precision to reconstruct what everyone else hoped would stay fragmented. And for a moment, just a moment, the silence cracks. That's what you saw in those 83 seconds. Not confusion, not hesitation, pressure. The kind of pressure that builds when a system is pushed to the edge of what it can explain without exposing what it can't. And Bondi felt that. You could hear it in the pauses. You could see it in the deflections. Answers that circled the question without ever touching it. Language designed not to reveal but to survive scrutiny. Because in moments like that, the goal isn't clarity, it's containment. But containment only works if people stop asking questions. And that's the one variable no institution can fully control. Because once doubt is introduced at that level, it spreads. Quietly at first, then all at once. People start connecting details, re-examining assumptions, looking at the same facts through a different lens. And suddenly, the official story isn't solid anymore. It's conditional, dependent on what you're willing to ignore. And that's where this becomes bigger than one case, bigger than one man. Because if a system can fail this completely, this visibly, this consequentially, and still produce no real accountability, then the issue isn't the failure, it's the design. A system that can absorb something like this without breaking isn't fragile, it's insulated. And insulation protects what's inside it. So the real question isn't just what happened to Epstein. It's what the system revealed about itself in the process. What it showed you about how power operates when it's under threat. What it prioritizes, what it protects, and what it's willing to leave unanswered. Because at the end of the day, facts don't disappear. Records don't erase themselves. Questions don't lose their weight just because time passes. They sit there, waiting, for the next person willing to ask them. The next moment when the pressure becomes too much to contain. The next 83 seconds when silence says more than any answer ever could. And when that moment comes again, and it will, the only thing that will matter is whether someone is willing to push past the silence, or whether the system succeeds in doing what it has done so far, holding the line, protecting itself, and leaving the truth just out of reach. And that's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Because once you admit that possibility, once you even consider that what happened wasn't just a breakdown, but something more controlled, more deliberate, you can't go back to the comfortable version of events. You can't unsee the pattern. You can't pretend the gaps don't exist. Every missing piece starts to feel intentional. Every unanswered question starts to feel protected. And the deeper you look, the harder it becomes to believe that nobody knew, that nobody saw, that nobody had the power to stop it. Because systems like this aren't built on ignorance. They're built on awareness, layers of it, controlled, compartmentalized, strategically limited, but always present. Which means somewhere along that chain, someone understood exactly what was happening. Someone knew the risks, knew the implications, knew what could be exposed if things went a different way. And that knowledge didn't trigger intervention. It didn't trigger transparency. It triggered silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just follow an event, but surrounds it, reinforces it, protects it from being fully understood. And that's why this still matters. Not because it's unresolved, but because of how it was left unresolved. Because of what that says about the limits of accountability when power is involved. Think about how many points along that timeline could have changed the outcome. One guard doing their job, one functioning camera, one supervisor enforcing protocol, one investigator pushing just a little further. It wouldn't have taken a complete overhaul. Just one break in the chain. But there was no break. Every link held in exactly the wrong way at exactly the wrong time. And that kind of alignment doesn't just raise suspicion, it demands explanation.